All right. So good afternoon, good morning, or wherever you are. Today is June 12th. I always forget to add that in, 2020. I have no idea how many weeks we are into the pandemic, but it doesn't matter anymore. Things are starting to open up a little bit. I think
it's 2020. Sorry.
2020. First laugh track. So things are starting to open up in states throughout the U.S. and a little bit here in Maryland. So it's interesting times. Today is our special episode. Normally, we've been talking to industry professionals about what's going on with COVID in their industries. However, earlier, a couple weeks ago now at this point, 5/26, there was a ruling by U.S. Magistrate Judge John Anderson out of the Eastern District of Virginia in the Capital One multi-district litigation around privilege for a Mandiant, attorney-client privilege for a Mandiant IR report. And it's kind of having some ripple effects throughout the whole cybersecurity industry. So we wanted to take a moment this week, pause, and really dig into that for a bit. And I brought the best people around for that. So let them introduce themselves. Tara Swaminatha, go.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Tara Swaminatha, and I've been working with Brian and his organization for a long time. And my background prior to becoming an attorney was as a software security consultant, although it would be complete malpractice if I tried to do any of that now. So I was a techie first, then went to law school. As an attorney, I worked at the Department of Justice in the computer crime and intellectual property section for a few years, and then have also worked at 3 different big law firms, including most recently as a partner at Squire Patton Boggs in the cyber and privacy practice. I have a particular interest in privilege and forensic reports because it's something that is misunderstood, misinterpreted, misused, and mischaracterized all over the place. So happy to have an opportunity to talk about it. And I should mention, I also have my own firm now, which is 0 Day Law.
Thank you. I was
waiting for that.
Plug that. Come on. Yeah. All right. Arif, you're up next.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Arif Basha. I am industry practitioner. I have been around. I started out in technology. My background is engineering. Then I was in computer science, and then moved over to cybersecurity. I worked in broad areas of security operations, architectures, and risk, compliance, audit, all those areas. In all the jobs I've done, work closely with legal folks because they
can't keep our noses out of anything.
they keep us out of trouble.
That's a nice way to put it.
And we use them as our backups as well, because a lot of times security folks don't have a good understanding of the legalities of all the things we get involved in. And most recently, I've been working in incident response as well as threat assessment management work for big firms, where over a period of 10 years or so, I had the opportunity to work on many breaches that involved third-party involvement, legal, and cyber insurance, and breach response, inside-outside counsels, and all those things. So I'm happy to add my 2 cents.
I should also add, Arif and I met in the lobby at, I think it was WFO, at a FBI sort of one-day read-in classified briefing on threats to the healthcare industry, which is now several years ago, but just a small world connection.
Part of FBI event, yes.
Steven, what are you doing for us?
Hey, Brian, thanks. What I do here, a little bit of everything, but at Volexity, I'm the president. At Volexity, we do a lot of incident response, forensics, network security monitoring, a lot of engagements to help organizations across kind of all sectors and industries deal with breaches, threats, proactively or reactively. Obviously, on the IR front, this topic, I wouldn't consider myself to be a legal expert by any means. So I'm glad we have Tara, on here to kind of provide that insight. But we've, I don't even know, 6+ years we've been doing engagements where it's been pretty commonplace for outside counsel to be engaged at some aspect, whether it's at the start of an incident or somewhere in between. So it's something we've been doing for quite a while. at the direction of counsel when we get engaged with a customer. But I'd say, in the last less than 5 years, last 2-3 years, it's become, I wouldn't say every engagement has that type of, attempted or successful privilege wrapped around it. But it's, extreme commonplace now. So glad to provide any insight and input I have on that. Me personally, do a lot of incident response forensics myself and with our team here. We have a lot of expertise, obviously, in the memory analysis, memory acquisition space at Volexity.
Not obvious. Why don't you explain that to us, the whole volatility Volexity thing?
So the VOL maybe there. So, obviously some of our, founders or co-founders in the company and people, in the company actively work and run a project called Volatility, the open source memory analysis framework written in Python. And we have kind of commercial capabilities for doing memory analysis and also acquiring memory, that we sell on the product side of our house. And we also use, eat our own dog food when we do engagements and do incident response kind of efforts. So we use those tools quite heavily ourselves. And then just a little quick background about me is the company as well as myself spend a lot of our time. We work on engagements of all kinds of extortion, ransomware, VEC, random compromise. But we spend a lot of our time in the realm of cyber espionage quite a bit. And I personally spend quite a bit of my time working with dissidents, NGOs, activists, and people who are potentially targeted at the individual level and not large corporations. Not quite as relevant to today's discussion, but that's just a big area that we like to focus on. Is kind of sometimes helping the under-equipped kind of deal with threats that are from a nation-state type level. So.
Yeah, Stephen's nation-state PowerPoint hacking, following the breadcrumbs things are amazing. I don't even know how he gets it done. But anyway, back on topic. Let's see. So, Tara, we're going to start with you. If you could just kind of explain to us, what was Judge Anderson's opinion and his order all about? And then, feel free to expand upon that and do what you will. You got your mic off.
Help if I unmute myself. Sure. So the magistrate judge's ruling in this case was a result of a bunch of back and forth filings where the plaintiffs wanted a copy of Capital One's Mandiant's forensic report, period. That's how this all started. And Capital One wanted to not provide it in discovery because they say that it was privileged. And I don't mean to imply that it wasn't, but that was their argument. And then the plaintiff's argument is, no, it's not. So the magistrate judge held for a variety of reasons that the report itself was not protected by privilege. And there are a number of facts that the judge cited to in order to arrive at his conclusion. And in addition, Capital One has since filed a reply, or rather a motion to reconsider. So it's possible the judge's argument will be opened up again, tossed out, add more facts, etc. But in essence, the main arguments that seem to be concerning for a lot of people, somewhat understandably, are the judge says, because Mandiant was retained prior to the incident, that's one factor the judge cited to, which led to the conclusion. The fact that Mandiant had been paid before, there was sort of an accumulation of hours under a retainer that were then used for other services like an assessment to assess Capital One's incident response preparedness. And then ultimately, Mandiant was engaged under a separate SOW to perform this incident response service. The judge also cited the fact that previous SOWs with Mandiant for regular services, not incident response, were almost identical to the incident response SOW. The only difference was in some of the wording, which actually I can pull up while I'm talking, but the judge's point being, you were just trying to assert privilege where you didn't have it. You thought if you issued one new SOW that would take care of everything. And without going into the rest of the details at this point, nobody likes when lawyers say it's very fact intensive. I can't tell you what the answer is based on one or two things. But it's true. It's not us being evasive. It's just how it goes. So a judge in this type of case will consider a whole host of information. And that's not just with respect to forensic reports. It's respect to any work done by non-lawyers, for lawyers for their clients. So you can only establish, there's also multiple privileges, and I won't get into them, but mostly people talk about attorney-client privilege. There's also attorney worked product privilege, which is covered in the opinions, and there are others as well. So there's different requirements for each, right?
Now, generally, wouldn't a IR report fall under that work product category?
You know what I have to say, right?
You can tell me it depends.
But yes, is that possible? Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? If you follow the right steps? Yes, absolutely. So, the general answer to your question is, can an incident response forensic report be covered by the attorney work product privilege? Yes, absolutely.
Right. Now, what about the investigation itself?
So that also depends. So attorney-client communications privilege protects communications between an attorney and a client. It can't just be facts between the two. It has to be legal advice, or in support of providing legal advice. Mm-hmm. With the work product privilege, it's a little bit different because it protects materials that are prepared in anticipation of litigation. Now, everything is somewhat prepared in anticipation of litigation if you're working with a lawyer, right? So mostly courts will say, was a particular analysis, investigation, exercise, report done because of anticipated litigation? And in this case, the judge didn't like that argument.
Right. Arif, do you have a comment there?
No, one thing I wanted to ask was the scope of the report, right? So there seemed to be some distinction between, was it created for a business purpose or attorney-client purpose? Was that,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, most of the reports that I had worked with, there was no such distinction, right? We just have the report, we use it, and there is no, even though attorneys are involved. So this may create additional scrutiny in all of our retainer agreements. Would you agree?
It shouldn't. So I without intending to malign lawyers, a lot of the people who are the lawyers who are most well-versed on privilege tend to be litigators because they deal with privilege all the time. And sometimes cyber or privacy lawyers are not as well-versed in that. The best case scenario, and I promise not to go on and on, but the best case scenario is the report was prepared, or the investigation, or the outside advisors. Like, think about CPAs, right? Lawyers can hire CPAs to do a financial investigation or assessment, and that work can be privileged if the CPAs were hired for the purpose of providing expert services that a lawyer doesn't have, so the lawyer can provide competent legal advice to his or her client. To your point, Arif, if experts are hired for a business purpose, that is not protected by either of the privileges that we were talking about. So factors that a court might look to are who engaged the IR firm. Was it the CTO, the CIO? Was it the general counsel? Was it the legal department? They will also look to see what is the content of the engagement letter. So to your point, Arif, should we scrutinize SOWs and contracts? No, because it cuts against you. If you try to assert that everything all the time is privileged no matter what, then a judge is less likely to agree with you when you have a legitimate claim for privilege.
Yeah. Now, one of the things the judge called out there was, at least from what I read, was that the contract signed through the legal office, but paid for out of non-legal funds. Somebody else's bucket of money, which to me, I was like, how would you even, how is an IR professional supposed to know where the check came from?
Correct.
How do you protect the client from something like that?
Correct. Yes. I don't think that, so if you think about, if I, as a human individual, go to a lawyer, somebody else can pay for it and it doesn't affect whether or not that legal advice is privileged. The payor doesn't matter. So in this case, I think the part of the problem was that they had accrued some multiple of 285 hours, or a total of 285 hours already had been paid for. and then they wanted to use some of that time. So for a business purpose, Mandiant was engaged and accrued all of these essentially free or paid for hours. Then when they were engaged to do incident response, the legal department engaged them, but Mandiant had charged them extra separate money. They allowed them to use the credit they'd built up. So I don't think, as a practical matter, that should be a concern of forensic firms who's paying for it.
So I have a question for you. So I saw, like I said, not earlier, just my reading and the kind of ruling, there's a couple things that we've discussed in related matters that seem to factor into the formula of the decision. One of them was that whether it's just the nature of the SOW, those compiled hours, is this idea that there obviously was a pre-existing relationship to do this type of work, or potentially do this type of work, or they had done similar work in the past. One aspect, and then I think I read another thing. I was kind of curious, maybe it's the totality of all these things piling up, which kind of, made it a bigger deal, or potentially a bigger deal, depending on the reconsideration, was that they also kind of produced a report where the ruling basically said, the report, had this not been prepared for litigation, wouldn't have been prepared substantially different. So you have a report that would have basically been written in a similar way regardless. And I was kind of curious if that played a pretty, a potential major factor in that, because they kind of said, well, if you were just doing a normal IR, it would look like this. You did a legal response, kind of looked the same. And then I didn't know how much, if that had particular weight in this more so than some of the other stuff, or they're all equal. I don't know.
It's a great question. And the simplest answer is that there's no magic cure or death warrant. So it's not the right phrasing to use, but having the report not be particularly different is not a good idea. I mean, to me, all of these fall in the category of what's better and what's worse, right? It's better if the ultimate forensic report does not look identical to previous reports that have been written for business purposes. But it's almost like a little bit like a smell test, right? Are you just trying to assert privilege, but we look at all the facts and circumstances and we say, look, that's not what you were doing. You just don't want this information to get out, which courts generally don't want to do. Or did lawyers legitimately hire this company for the purpose of providing expertise to the lawyers that the lawyers need to provide legal advice to their client?
Yeah, that's it. And that's kind of what I thought. I kind of started thinking about some of the ways we've been engaged in IR. And we have cases where, we were brought in, they want to look into possible employee misuse. And it's literally for a legal decision or a HIPAA analysis or something like that. And to me, if I read this, I'm like, those are clearly, those cases. And we have others where we have ongoing work with a customer. We do an IR, and it's really a technical investigation in part, potentially for legal purposes, but at the end of the day, they want to know how they were breached. They want to know what the remedial steps are, or how they can prevent it from happening again, and potentially memorialize, some of that activity. Although sometimes with the legal involvement, from what I used to, sometimes you memorialize or speculate or recommend a little bit less to be compliant. But it definitely seems to be clear difference sometimes in some of the work we do, and others. I don't know. I read this and I'm like, I don't know where that would stand if someone challenged it. Should there be a legal issue at hand?
So you're correct in that the judge points out, and common knowledge about this or common opinion about this right now is no company could say we didn't need an investigation for business purposes. Right. If you have a breach for your business purposes, you're going to have to conduct an investigation, figure out what happened.
Wouldn't almost everything be for a business purpose? Even if it was just a fact-finding investigation, somebody's made that decision that we as the business need to have these facts.
Yes. The trouble is that can't be privileged.
I mean,
that's okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please go ahead.
Could a report be in separate segments, so like operational focused report where you are dealing with technical stuff, business stuff that you distribute a little bit less privileged way versus attorney product where you're looking at legal aspects, legal risks?
Yes. And I think, so yes and no, it depends, right? There is something called subject matter waiver of privilege. So on the flip side of what we're talking about, which is you have to legitimately establish privilege with the factors that we've talked about and others. even if you have legitimately established privilege in communications or an investigation or report, you can waive it accidentally by forwarding it to the wrong person or by sending it to lots of people. I'll just tell you from my perspective what I do. And I, by no means am a primary civil litigator, but
and the sending it to lots of people, that seemed to be really at the core of Judge Anderson's position, was like, you sent this to just everybody and their brother in an uncontrolled almost manner. Yes. For lots of different purposes.
Yep, that's right. And that makes it look like it was not a privileged document. It was for business purposes because you shared it with so many people. The best case scenario, which very few people do, although I think in the Target case they did, is you have two IR firms. One is engaged for business purposes and one is engaged for legal analysis, right? That is ideal. And the legal analysis IR firm is only talking to the lawyers or maybe also talking to the IT and operational folks inside the organization, but that's a just totally separate exercise. As a practical matter, all four of us know that is extremely rare. It's really expensive. And when everybody's stressed out, the first week of an investigation, the first 24 hours, nobody is willing to negotiate and listen to this nuanced legal argument about why we should do different things for privilege purposes, right? So the best case scenario, I'll just tell you to hopefully put some of the hyperventilation at ease, is engaged through counsel, literally engaged through counsel, as you were saying, Steve, that the legal department is the one who actually engages the entity, not just signs the form, but also things that may seem stupid, like a privilege briefing where everybody has to get on the phone with the lawyer. And poor Brian's had to listen to many of these from me. But at the beginning of this most recent engagement, if you've used an IR firm like Mandia before in the Capital One situation, and then you come to, now we want you to do incident response, stop. Get a small group of people on the phone who are working on this and talk through, here's what privilege is, here's what it isn't. Don't assume everything's privileged, because then you're going to write down a whole bunch of stuff that I don't want you to write down. Still be careful. Don't think that this is the cloak of invisibility from Harry Potter. And limit your communications. If in doubt, pick up the phone, right? Don't write things in an email that are completely speculative and might not be privileged. You just don't need to do that. Then when do lawyers need to be part of the conversation? Some people think if a lawyer's on the phone, the conversation is privileged. Nope. Likewise, if a lawyer's not on the phone, the conversation can't be privileged. It depends. The lawyer needs to be directing and overseeing the investigation. So if you have a lawyer involved in the main discussions, but then Arif calls Steven and they're coordinating about how to get into a particular server or who's going to send what USB drive to whom or how they're going to put something on SharePoint, that doesn't mean all of that work is no longer privileged.
Yeah, thanks. I have another. So we have the scenario, like let's take we can use a Capital One, and then we can use a scenario to describe where you potentially have, you can also run into too many cooks in a kitchen scenario, but you have two firms simultaneously for different purposes. I think like in the Capital One case, or which would often be the case with larger organizations or even some mid-sized organizations, you have a security team that's internal. They'll run, cooperatively usually, but they can potentially run their complete own separate investigation. I don't know that I know a ton about, how Capital One specifically was run, but I think reading the document, it sounds like they were run what they called a separate internal investigation. They had the outside investigation.
Yep.
The other side of that is what we run into. So we have that a lot with, large companies. That's, they always have their own team doing stuff either in support of or potentially separate. But we also work with like small NGOs or sometimes real small organizations, places that have like 12 employees. They don't have a security firm. They don't have any security capability.
They don't have an IT team.
Yeah, they have no IT team. They have someone inside that does it, or they have an MSP, an outside party that they do on support tickets. Some of them are bigger and they have a dedicated person, but they are not going to do any type of security investigation. And our involvement, or similar security firms' involvement with an organization like that, is they are the internal team and they are the outside team. So I'm kind of curious, in the case where there is no possible inside investigation, whether done under legal, attempted or proper legal privilege, if you are the only means by which an investigation can occur, that you're going to get all the technical details, they're going to be able to figure out nothing without you. Mm-hmm. Or how does that fit into this scenario? Because that's kind of like the other polar end of the mid-range, having two firms involved or the firm involved.
Well, and to take off of that, I mean, Arif and Stephen, you've both seen this where, the report includes not only the investigation, but a bunch of, basically security improvement type ideas and observations, all glommed into one report, which I think there was some mention of that in what Judge Anderson also pointed out, is that it wasn't 100% investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I'll tell you from our legal things, that recommendations or a bolded list of things we might have in a normal report, usually when we're engaged under counsel, is often it may be requested that that's omitted, because if things are not done, we're usually told, the advice that we've overheard is that you give a big list of recommendations. The fear is those are not done, and this work that does become discoverable at some point, and you didn't do those things either.
Well, it becomes a playbook for plaintiffs' counsel. Basically, they run right back down through those.
Exactly.
So what are you supposed to do, right? What does a company do that needs to know what to improve but doesn't want to hand an admission or a playbook to plaintiffs' counsel?
And it's a frequent client request. I mean, how they get in, what went wrong, how much did they get, how much is this going to cost me, and then what should we do to fix it all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to Tara's point, I mean, a lot of times a lot of stuff is done on phone calls. Like they try to, the effort is to discuss this with counsel on the call, and I wouldn't say it's a shady thing or anything, but just the goal is to not write down as much as possible in a lot of these cases, and that's I would say that's definitely a persistent theme, and I don't think that's necessarily probably unique to IT or cybersecurity with regards to certain advice either. So
exactly, and yet that shouldn't be considered as the cloak of invisibility either, because they can always depose somebody, and unless you could go down the argument of restricting that person's deposition for privilege reasons. But anyway, you're right. It's tricky.
And some of these reports have complete evidence of vulnerabilities, architecture, internal systems, which is competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when Mandiant is doing investigations, they have access to all of this information. So they will put footnotes, and they'll have like screenshots, all kinds of stuff. So that's why I was referring to, could we conceivably separate these reports from operational business versus legal?
Yeah, and especially keeping the reports as working drafts until everybody's agreed what should go into it is helpful. Just like the conversations you were talking about, it's much better when people can have an open discussion of what are the different balls up in the air here, and what do we want to put in the report, and what doesn't need to be in the report. And okay, we may have to have a list of the things we need to fix, and it may be discoverable. But one thing that can help in that situation is, here's all the things that need to be fixed. Here's our prioritized list, and here's our plan. We're going to fix these in 3 months. We're going to fix these in 6 months. We're going to fix these in 2 years. It's not perfect, but it's one way of mitigating the damage from that if it's not privileged.
So let's talk to the money side of this for a second. And Arif, I want to, you as the consumer of these services from companies like Mandiant or Volexity or something like this, the standard way, and I guess it's been this way since, I don't know, we started doing it Mandiant years ago, was this upfront retainer that doesn't really work, even though the name's the same, as a legal retainer. You're not working it off as you go or things like this. It's just sort of prepaid block of hours that if you don't use it this year, a vendor typically tries to slide in some other services or assessments or things like this to make up the difference. And then you owe them the same amount, January 1 the next year, and so on and so on and so on.
And Capital One pushed on that a lot in their motion to reconsider, saying exactly what you just said.
Right.
Didn't defeat
but the
privilege.
judge also seemed to hit on that as, an item is, because you're using this, what you first said was for incident response money as everyday, assessment, grunt IT security work, all, whatever else might come up in there. and then you switch back over, it becomes funny.
I think in most organizations, it's signed by security IT teams because they are the ones being approached by the vendors and, hey, this is what on a rainy day you can have this thing, you should sign it. Sometimes it's a $0 retainer agreement. Most of the time people don't even read it. It said there's no cost and we'll look at it when the need comes. So those scenarios. And one question I had was, could you, in this case, the one you're describing, Brian, could they conceivably have two retainers for similar but different purposes in cases like this? So you have retainer in case of consulting or assessment, security work versus incident response, and we will get to designate which retainer will fall under what.
Right. And some organizations like to do that because of how they handle their money, right? I'm given this block of money at this point, and if I allocate it to your company's contract right now, I've secured this money essentially from being taken by some other part of the IT organization. So I want to place that big blob of money with you, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with it over the course of the year or whatever.
Right. And the relationship with are you with the IT department or security department versus the legal team? Legals usually don't come into the picture until after the cybersecurity teams have, some mature organizations have policies in place to educate people to when to involves legal quickly. But for the most part, initial legwork when something is detected is done by security people. As Stephen was saying, like the team works on it for a day, a couple of days until figure out what it is and how long it's been, what's the depth and breadth of the breach before we involve other people, right?
Right. So what's, we're based on your experience, what's your preference for handling it? How would you normally, what are you looking for as the consumer of that?
I think now, after reading what we have been reading about Capital One's reports in the last few weeks, to me, it looks like we may need to have this legal input right at the beginning and maybe potentially have multiple. That's why I wanted to ask the question to Tara. Could you have multiple retainer agreements with the same firm with the scope? Because one of the things that Judge brought up was, the scope was similar, both of the agreements. So could you make it distinguished enough to maintain privilege on one versus the other?
It's a good question. I haven't come across that, but as I'm thinking off the top of my head, yes, I don't know that just different statements of work, but if one engagement was through the legal department with the sort of preface language that I mentioned, which is Acme Company has hired 0 Day Law as our outside counsel to give us legal advice in connection with a potential incident. Acme doesn't have the expertise it needs to properly advise. Acme needs forensic expertise. Stephen has that expertise. Acme allows 0 Day Law to engage Stephen to provide that expertise. And Stephen's expertise is going to 0 Day Law for the purposes of providing legal advice to Acme, or Arif, I should have said. If that is the case, that's sort of your best case scenario for privilege, as long as each one of those things are true, right? I realize I keep saying that, but like I said, people try to claim privilege over everything under the sun. And for some people, that's a tactic and it works. People I highly respect. I think that makes your true privilege arguments hold less water if you're trying to make it everywhere. So a roundabout way of saying to you, Arif, that sounds like that could be possible. It could also be unsuccessful if a variety of other factors come into play, right? Really, the general counsel's office never looked at it. Really, they were never involved in it. Really, the Stephen and his team only ever met with you, Arif, and your IT team, and nobody ever talked to anybody in the legal department. Nobody in the legal department explained what privilege is and what the privilege protocols are and who has to be involved in what.
Yeah, one scenario I've seen is we had this agreement with a law firm, legal outside counsel, and basically they had retainers on their retainers with third-party investigators like Mandiants and CrowdStrikes. And when one approach was always like go to the legal instead of going to, even though you may have direct contracts with them, so let them deal with this. So they initiate the relationship. That may provide some privilege opportunity, I would imagine.
Now, how much does it muddy the water when you have a situation like a FireEye who's selling product and services, directly into the IT and IT security branch of the house, and and that's their primary focus.
You're giving me hives, not about FireEye, but the 75 organizations.
You can say this about a bunch of different companies, and CrowdStrikes, and
everybody,
Carbon Blacks, and blah blah, the Volexities of the world. They're selling their products into it. And then, that very same client comes to you and says, I have this thing. Can you help me out? And of course, you're going to say yes.
Well, right.
Even we say yes, right? That's how we do it. We say yes.
Well, hopefully only where you're able to perform the services, which is the case for you all the time. But sorry, please.
Yeah, that separate part of your company doing this, services IR thing.
It's a nightmare.
Contract vehicle in place. That may be.
And look, the worse the situation, the worse the incident, the more likely all of these things will go wrong just by Murphy's Law, right? So one massive ransomware incident I worked on last summer.
Perfect example.
Right, right? Yeah. Multiple billion-dollar company. Everything came to a screeching halt, everything. But they had outsourced their IT security services, like Stephen, like you were just talking, although they were a massive company. The SOC basically was outsourced. So understandably, the company providing the SOC probably, I'm putting words in their mouth, probably felt like they screwed up. They were asleep at the job and something happened. So they're in there trying to fix everything. And they don't really want to tell legal for the client what they're doing because they don't want the client to sue them saying you didn't do your pro IT SOC services properly because you let somebody in. And then they're not communicating with the Brians of the world who get called in, and the Stevens of the world who get called in, who are trying to do a forensic investigation on behalf of the company. Meanwhile, the pro outside SOC sourced company then brings in their investigative team. Yes, it muddies the water. It makes it really, really hard. And look, in these situations, everybody's well-meaning generally, but this situation where I worked on this, the CEO, the CTO, the CFO, the general counsel, the head of IT, they were all under immense pressure. They didn't have access to their normal email. They didn't have access to their VoIP phones were all down as well. But my best advice is for this, not something that lawyers usually say, but have a good relationship between the legal department and the IT or the information security department. Because if you at least trust each other and trust that you both have the company's best interests at heart, then IT is not going to be suspicious of legal department trying to grab control something and make the IT folks look bad. And the legal department's not worrying that the IT department's hiding something.
So in the best run organizations that I work with, big multinational stuff, and the ones that really have it wired together well, there's actually attorney from legal assigned directly to the IT and IT security element, the SOC, the whole thing. And it's always their touchstone person for pretty much anything. And so everybody knows everybody, everybody's friendly with everybody, and that relationship gets built versus the, less successful situation where the attorney walks in and goes, wow, I didn't even know that there's a lot of room in here, Never been to the IT department at all. How many of you guys are in here?
That's sort of thing. Just sort of barks orders at everybody because he's stressed out or whatever. But I mean,
yeah, I'll tell you from the like the managed security service provider, the incident response provider perspective, we have across the board different things. So we have just interact with IT department. We have ones where we know their general counsel and by name, and we're on really good terms with them. We have others where we never once heard from their legal department. Maybe their procurement department is actually the ones who even our contracts department handled the contract and didn't even see a legal oversight. Maybe it was there, maybe it wasn't. But obviously, from our perspective, as the people doing like the incident response, our first and foremost is we want to basically solve the problem and figure it out. And I'd say like a lot of the advice for who should connect or when they're going to connect. If we get asked, or sometimes it's painfully obvious, we may say something, but we operate in trying to solve the problem, fix it, technical analysis, stop the bleeding, put remediation in place, and we kind of like for the most part, we kind of leave that largely to the client and like what they want to do. So we have cases where outside counsel has been brought in for really small things, and customers that like where we look at it and we're like, oh my gosh, like maybe we even said something. We don't involve counsel at all. And it's just kind of up to either what their risk tolerance is, or it could just be a matter of knowledge. Maybe they just don't know that's an option, or they don't think that's an option, or maybe they don't want to pay for it. We have others, the first person they pick up and call is their insurance company. So
Yes.
And then the outside counsel is involved, or either in parallel or through the insurance company. So the route at which this stuff happens is quite variable depending on the customer. And from everything, we just want to get the work done. We want to find the interesting stuff. We want to crack the case. We follow whatever the path of least resistance. We just do our job. If we have to go through here and get on that call, we want to do that call as quickly as possible and initiate. So
We've noticed. Just kidding. I'm kidding. I respect it. And your point actually was part of the argument in the Capital One case, because Capital One had to disclose information to regulators. And insurance companies and regulators, when you disclose information to them, it is not privileged anymore. Right. You have to do it, but counsel could try to just make it as unharmful as possible. That's not the word, innocuous as possible. But it's really hard to do. And, I've been on the defending the client side, talking to regulators saying, if we give you this whole thing, it will be discoverable in litigation because we've waived privilege now, and plaintiff's going to say, give us everything you've ever given to a regulator. And
I don't think I've ever seen a cybersecurity insurance company pay out without a copy of that final report. I mean, that's always a big piece of it. We need that finalized version so we can provide it to the carrier, because they're not going to give us a check until we do.
That's right. And so Brian and I work to make those reports as transparent as they need to be, but no more transparent than they need to be.
All right, so here's a topic I wanted to discuss. So I've been following this whole issue. I think it first came to light at all was from cyberscoop.com, and they've had a pretty good dissertation of what's going on there, including attaching the legal documents, the opinions, and so forth. Not perfect. You got to go to Westlaw or something like that to get the rest of it. But the further I get away from that sort of legal end of the things, and the more I get out into the cybersecurity, the discussions and things like this, the wilder and stranger the claims get about what this means to the industry. And so I wanted to talk specifically for Stephen and Arif. What have you been hearing about it? Because I've heard stuff. I've read stuff where they're like, the lead line is, Mandiant thinks blah blah blah, case. And you're like, wait, I don't even think they're, other than they wrote the report, I don't think that's really has anything to do with them, really. It's mostly the handling of the document. Companies need to be aware that incident response retainers are dead. And it's just like the craziest, sort of publications out there. So, what have you seen around this? As you were prepping for this, what did you come across?
Yeah, so I probably have an interesting take on this. So when it, we don't, we haven't followed this like, on a every day, hour by hour, but when the ruling first came out, definitely, within the company, within Volexity, we discussed it and we marveled at it. And, some of the change of our business model. And I think for a lot of these, at least the IR firms, I think not much from my perspective. The way we do business, the way we've been engaging with, multiple engagements we started since then, at least one of them in the last couple of weeks with underprivileged. it doesn't really change a whole lot from where they operate. If anything, we kind of jokingly say, if this potentially has more exposure to your report becoming public or discoverable, it's more of a motivator, which we already strive to do, to make sure your report is actually a really good report. Because if you're an IR company who's doing a crap job and now your work's going to be discoverable, you have to assume that it's going to be out there and everyone's going to see how poor of a job you did. So we joke like, hey, now this this happens, people actually see how good of a job we did. It's actually get to see the reports and the quality of our work. So we kind of jokingly inside said, hey, if this happens with one of our customers, the report gets out there, it actually like a good advertisement for us, because we think our work product is really nice. But in terms of actual worrying about, hey, are people worried about retainers? Have you heard a customer, existing or new, voice this or even mention this? Not a one so far, and I didn't come up with some of the law firms that we talked to recently in terms of the ongoing work or anything like that. I mean, obviously people are hoping, and I think probably a lot of people would hope that the decision would be reconsidered, kind of what Tara mentioned. Obviously this has impacts on I'd say largely the companies trying to engage privilege, and obviously a lot of law firms have started, this has been a tactic or a way to kind of provide work in business avenue for them. So if somehow this thing all got tossed out and it got worse and worse, it'd probably be detrimental to a lot of abilities to claim privilege and obviously business models for folks. But I don't think it's like you said, is it to get further away, it's like, oh, it's crazy. But if you actually look at that ruling, it's around, we're just speculating on what the formula of all those things is, of which one's the most
narrow.
But it's not like this one thing where all security stuff is bad. It's like a combination of things, and all might get reversed, like you said. So there may be still no precedent of overturning anything. That's not my realm, but I'd say from our perspective, it doesn't change the way we operate. But I could see why people would be concerned, or potentially should be concerned. But like I said, from my earlier point, we just look to solve the task at hand. If they say we got to CC all these people, put this footer on the thing, make sure in a phone call, don't have them not CC'd, we just follow that. Whether that ends up being privileged or not, that's not for us to say. We just do our job and as best we can and follow the directions we're given, so we're not straying from that and being the obvious cause as to why privilege would be lost or something. And that's what
and that's what I took from the opinion. So Arif, if I'm working for you, and I don't have any impact, on the client if I say, hey, don't send this to whoever. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to do whatever their business's processes are for that,
That's when I get a call. Tara, this is Brian. Just want to make sure I'm right. These people say they don't have to do this.
but that is a pretty standard thing. Those reports do get spread around widely.
Right. Yeah.
They shouldn't. If they're properly, if you've established privilege in them, distributing them can cause an inadvertent waiver.
Interesting. I think those reports may also contain a lot of dirty stuff that we don't want to be public anyway, because it has our vulnerabilities, it has our potential weak spots that we may not be able to address immediately. They're long-term. It may take a long time to architectural changes, investments, and all that. And then another judge said distributed widely. What is widely? And that's the one thing I always get, what is widely? Need to know basis. That's what I say. I tell people absolute need to know as part of the incident remediation response activities, but there will always be other people. So what is your take on that, Tara? What is considered widely distributed versus absolute need to know?
So think of it like who is on the team, the privileged team, right? And so the number of people, obviously it's better the smaller the number, but what's crucial is, have they all been briefed on privilege? Are they all observing the privilege protocol, meaning put this in email, don't put this in email, include these people on phone calls, whatever. If it's those people who are receiving it, then that's usually okay. And it should be okay, because they're the ones who understand that the purpose of this particular piece of work we're working on is to advise lawyers so the lawyers can advise the company.
Right. But Arif, help me out here. So if I'm thinking about all the offices inside a company that report goes to, it's going to end up in risk. It's going to end up in audit. It's potentially going to end up, on the CFO's desk. one from how IT is sometimes strangely structured under finance, things like that. But, to the bill paying portion of it, I mean, it could end up in a board, meeting, presentation, distribution packet.
That's not a good idea.
All those things, not to mention the copies that are going to make their way to, around the IT department and things like this. I mean,
Yeah, I think the reports, my advice and my approach has always been the big report should never go to everybody. I think we always made a summary of a 1-page, 2-page summary to distribute to the board and CFOs. They want to see the bills. They look at the receipts, invoices. They want to sign off, and then we'll have all these conversations. But this is like Greek and Latin. They don't understand these reports, and why do we need to send it to them? So we always keep it to close. One, I have seen also an approach where, Tara, you may have seen it, but after a breach, people create a separate communication channels, which are designated as privileged. They're still email, but not the corporate email, but private proprietary email communication channels. And that's all. Is that a good enough privilege approach?
We would need at least 6 hours to talk about Slack and Signal.
Yep, we have done all of those, yep.
Wicker Me or whatever else.
All right. Well, since we don't have 6 hours, and we've actually reached our time limit here, I want to thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time and the time that you put into going through and reading all this ahead of time. I greatly appreciate that, and showing up on a Friday for me. That's great. Everybody comb their hair mostly, except for Arif. Touch that up later. But
I don't have that problem.
Thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you and talking to you all again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.